Every evening at exactly 7, Alina placed her phone beside her chair. She didn't put it there because she expected anyone to call. At least that was what she told herself. The phone was old, with a small crack across the corner of the screen. She had thought about replacing it several times, but there was something about that particular phone she couldn't let go of. It had been there through too many years. Too many birthdays. Too many Christmas mornings. Too many conversations with the person whose name she still couldn't bring herself to delete. David. Her son. Alina was 74 now. She lived alone in the little house where she and her husband Frank had raised David. Frank had been gone for nearly 8 years. Since his death, the house had become quieter, but Alina had learned to live with that kind of quiet. A husband leaving behind an empty chair was one kind of loneliness. A child growing distant was another. And Alina had learned that the second kind could be harder to explain. David had not died. He was somewhere out there. That was the problem. If someone you love dies, eventually you understand that there will be no phone call. When someone you love simply stops calling, your heart keeps making excuses. He's busy. Work is difficult. Maybe his marriage needs attention. Maybe he forgot. He'll call next week. Alina had been telling herself those things for years. David had moved across the country 12 years earlier. At first, he called every Sunday. Sometimes he called from his car. Sometimes from his kitchen. Sometimes he would say, "Mom, I've only got 10 minutes. And Alina would answer, "Then I'll only keep you for 9. He would laugh. That's not how this works. It's exactly how it works. Those calls had once seemed ordinary. Now she remembered every one. The first year after he moved, the calls became less frequent. Every Sunday became every other Sunday. Then once a month. Then whenever he remembered. Alina never complained. She didn't want to become the mother who made her son's life feel like an obligation. When friends asked about David, she always smiled. He's doing well. Is he coming for Thanksgiving? I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure yet. He must be busy. Yes, Alina would say. He's very busy. She always defended him, even when there was no one to defend him from. At 7 every evening, she still placed the phone beside her chair. Sometimes she sat there with a book. Sometimes she watched television. Sometimes she knitted. But every few minutes, her eyes drifted toward the screen. She never admitted that she was checking. One evening, her neighbor Ruth stopped by with a loaf of banana bread. You're sitting in the dark again, Ruth said. Alina looked toward the window. She hadn't realized the sun had gone down. I was reading. Ruth looked at the closed book on Alina's lap. Of course you were. Alina smiled. Ruth noticed the phone, still keeping it close. Alina shrugged. It's just a phone. Ruth didn't argue. She had known Alina long enough to understand when an answer wasn't really an answer. After Ruth left, Alina returned to her chair. The house was quiet. She looked at the phone. No message. No missed call. Nothing. She picked it up and checked the battery. 92%. She smiled at herself. What are you doing? There was nobody there to answer. She put the phone down. Then, almost without thinking, she whispered, He'll call. She had said those words so many times that they no longer sounded like a promise. They sounded like a habit. And perhaps that was what waiting had become. Not hope exactly, not expectation, just a small place in her evening that she continued to leave open for her son. Because mothers are strange that way. They can spend years telling their children, go build your own life. And when the child actually does, part of the mother's heart remains standing at the door, not asking the child to come back, just hoping he remembers the way home. David had never intended to stop calling his mother. At least, Alina believed that. When he first moved across the country, he called every Sunday. He would tell her about his apartment, his new job, the people he was meeting, and the strange weather. Alina listened to every detail. She didn't care whether the story was important. She simply liked hearing his voice. One Sunday, after they had been talking for almost an hour, David glanced at the time. "Mom, I've got to go. You're the one who called me. I know. And now you're leaving. I have things to do." Alina laughed. "All right, go. I'll call you next Sunday." "You'd better." "I will." She believed him. Why wouldn't she? He had always called. The following Sunday, the phone rang. Alina smiled before she even looked at the screen. "David." She answered immediately. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hi, Mom." That was how it went for a while. A promise made. A call kept. Another promise. Then life became busier. David's job changed. He moved again. He met someone. He got married. Alina was happy for him. She wanted her son to have a full life. When he told her he couldn't make it home for Thanksgiving one year, she said, "That's okay. You're not upset." "Of course not. I'll come at Christmas." "You'd better." "I will." Christmas came. David couldn't make it. There had been a problem at work. Then another commitment. Then a flight issue. He apologized several times. Alina told him not to worry. "Just call me when you get a chance." "I will, Mom." He did. 2 days later, they talked for 20 minutes. Alina was grateful. She didn't mention the missed Christmas. She didn't want him to feel guilty. That became her habit. When he called less, she made excuses for him. When he forgot her birthday, she told herself he had excuses for him. When he forgot her birthday, she told herself he had been busy. When he missed another holiday, she said the important thing was that he was healthy. When weeks passed without hearing from him, she told friends, "He's just got a lot going on." And perhaps he did. Alina never knew. That was the hardest part. She was hurt, but not enough to stop hoping. She simply waited. One afternoon, David called unexpectedly. Alina was in the garden. She almost dropped the watering can when she saw his name. "David." "Hey, Mom. Are you okay?" "Yes, why?" "You never call in the afternoon." "I know." She smiled. "Well, this is a nice surprise." They talked for a while. David sounded tired. Alina wanted to ask whether something was wrong. She didn't. Instead, she asked about work. He told her things were complicated. Then he said something that stayed with her. "I'm going to do better, Mom." Alina sat down on the garden bench. "You don't have to." "I do. You're my son, I don't keep score." "I know. I just want you to be happy." There was silence on the line. Then David said, "I'll call you this weekend." Alina smiled. "Okay. I promise." She believed him. Again, Saturday came. Then Sunday. The phone stayed silent. Alina didn't call him. She told herself he had forgotten. Monday passed. Tuesday. Wednesday. By Thursday, she had stopped looking at the phone every few minutes. But she still kept it beside her chair every evening. The following week, she called him. No answer. She left a message. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom, just checking on you, call me when you can." She hung up. She didn't call again. She didn't want to become a burden. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And then something changed. Alina stopped telling Ruth when she was disappointed. She stopped telling friends that David had promised to call. She simply said, "He's busy." The words became easier to say, but they became harder to believe. Years passed. At first, Alina still told people about David. If someone asked how her son was doing, she answered honestly, "He's busy." If someone asked when he was coming home, she would say, "We haven't made plans yet." If someone asked whether he called, she would smile. Sometimes. Eventually, people stopped asking. Alina was relieved. She didn't want anyone looking at her with pity. She didn't want Ruth to notice how quickly she checked the phone whenever it rang. She didn't want friends asking whether David had called that week. So she stopped talking about it. She learned to keep the waiting private. Her evenings remained the same. At 7, the phone went beside her chair. She would make tea, turn on the television, open a book, and every few minutes, her eyes would drift toward the phone. She never told anyone. Not anymore. David's last call became harder to remember. She couldn't remember exactly what day it had been. She remembered his voice. She remembered him saying he was sorry. She remembered him promising to call. But the details had faded. That frightened her, because she wondered whether she was beginning to forget him. Then she reminded herself that forgetting a date was not the same as forgetting a person. She remembered his laugh. She remembered the way he used to leave his shoes near the front door. She remembered him eating cereal straight from the box when he was a teenager. She remembered how he hated mushrooms. She remembered how he used to call her Mom when he wanted something and Mother when he was joking. Those memories were still sharp. The phone calls were what had become blurry. One afternoon, Alina found an old birthday card in a drawer. It was from David. He had written only a few lines. "Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry I can't be there. I'll make it up to you." She read the sentence twice. Then she smiled sadly. He had always said things like that. "I'll make it up to you. I'll call this weekend. I'll come home soon. I'll see you next month." Promises had once sounded like plans. Now they sounded like echoes. Alina put the card back in the drawer. She didn't throw it away. She couldn't. That evening, Ruth came over. They had dinner together. Afterward, Ruth washed the dishes while Alina dried them. "Do you ever hear from David?" Ruth asked casually. Alina kept drying the plates. "Sometimes." Ruth glanced at her. "When was the last time?" Alina paused. "I don't remember." Ruth didn't ask anything else. That was why Alina loved her. Ruth knew when to stop. Later, they sat on the porch. The evening was warm. Cars passed occasionally on the street. A dog barked somewhere nearby. Ruth looked at Alina. "You know you can call him." Alina nodded. "I know. Have you?" "Once." "And?" He didn't answer. Ruth was quiet. Alina looked toward the road. "I don't want to keep calling." "Why?" "Because I don't want him to think I need something." Ruth frowned. "You're his mother." "I know. You're allowed to miss your son." Alina smiled. "I know. But that wasn't the whole truth." She was afraid. If she called again and he didn't answer, the silence would feel different. Right now, she could still tell herself he was busy. He was working. He was traveling. He had forgotten. There were still explanations. A returned call would confirm that he remembered her. Another unanswered call might confirm something else. So Alina chose not to find out. She kept waiting instead. It was easier. Or at least it felt easier. Another year passed. Then another. Alina grew older. Her hair became almost completely gray. The garden became smaller because she no longer wanted to maintain all of it. She sold the car she rarely drove. She started using a grocery delivery service. Life became quieter, but the phone remained, always beside her chair. One evening, Alina looked at it and realized something. She couldn't remember how long she had been waiting. 10 years. 11. Perhaps 12. She counted backward. David had moved away 12 years ago. The first few years had been full of calls, then fewer calls, then almost none. And now there were years of silence. Alina stared at the phone. She felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not sadness, tiredness. She was tired of protecting a promise that David no longer seemed to remember making. For the first time, she allowed herself to think. Maybe he isn't calling because he doesn't want to. The thought hurt, but it was honest. She sat back in her chair. Then she looked at the old photograph on the mantel. David was about 10 years old. His arm was around her waist. He was smiling at the camera. Alina touched the photograph. "That boy loved me," she whispered. She knew that. Whatever had happened to the grown man, that little boy had loved her. And she had loved him. Maybe that was all she could hold on to. Not the promise. Not the waiting. The love. That night, Alina turned the phone off. She had never done that before. She placed it on the table. Then she went upstairs. For the first time in years, she went to bed without wondering whether the phone might ring. The next evening, Alina almost forgot about the phone. She had spent the morning in the garden and the afternoon at the grocery store. By 6:30, she was tired. She made herself a simple dinner. Soup, toast, a cup of tea. Then she sat in her usual chair. The phone was on the table, but this time she didn't turn it on. She had decided she was done waiting, at least for tonight. She picked up her book. For nearly 20 minutes, she read without looking toward the phone. Then it happened. The screen lit up. The phone began to ring. Alina froze. She stared at it. There was a name on the screen. David. Her son. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe. The phone kept ringing. She had imagined this moment for years. She had imagined hearing that sound while sitting in this exact chair. She had imagined seeing his name. She had imagined answering immediately. David. She had imagined him saying, "Hi, Mom." She had imagined herself crying. She had imagined telling him how much she had missed him. She had imagined forgiving him before he even apologized. But now that the moment had actually arrived, Alina couldn't move. For years, Alina had imagined this moment. She had never imagined that the thing she wanted most would also be the thing she was most afraid to answer. The phone continued ringing. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the screen again. David. It was really him. Not a memory. Not an old voicemail. Not a photograph. His name was there. Her thumb moved toward the answer button, then stopped. What would she say? Where had he been? Why had he waited so long? Why had he let years pass without calling? And what if he didn't even realize how much those years had hurt? The phone rang again. Alina stood up. She took one step toward the table, then another. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it. She reached for the phone, but before her finger touched the screen, the ringing stopped. Silence. Alina stared at the screen. Missed call. David. She sat down. For a long time, she didn't move. Then the phone rang again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She answered. Hello. There was silence. Then a man's voice. Mom. Alina closed her eyes. She knew that voice. Older. Tired. Different. But still his. Her hand covered her mouth. David. Yeah. She couldn't speak. Mom, are you there? Yes. Her voice broke. I'm here. There was another silence. David breathed heavily. I've wanted to call you for a long time. Alina looked toward the photograph on the mantel. Then why didn't you? She hadn't planned to ask. The words simply came out. David was quiet. I don't know how to answer that. Alina swallowed. I waited. I know. No, she said softly, you don't. David didn't respond. Alina looked at the phone in her hand. I waited for years. I know I've hurt you. You did. I was ashamed. Of what? Another silence. Then David said, my life didn't turn out the way I thought it would. Alina listened. He told her about the years she had never known about. The marriage that had ended. The job he had lost, the debts he had struggled with, the shame he had carried. He had kept telling himself he would call when things got better. Then 1 year became another. The longer he stayed away, the harder it became to call. I kept thinking I had to fix everything before I could come home, he said. Alina closed her eyes. You didn't have to fix anything. I know that now. She wiped a tear from her cheek. You were my son. I know. You could have called. I was afraid. Alina looked at the empty chair beside her. So was I. Neither of them spoke. Then David said quietly, I'm sorry, Mom. Those were the 2 words Alina had imagined hearing for years. But hearing them did not erase anything. It didn't give her back the birthdays, the holidays, the evenings, the years. A phone call could not return them. Still, something inside her finally became quiet. Not because everything was repaired, but because she finally had an answer. And sometimes, after years of waiting, an answer is not what you hoped for. It's simply what you needed to stop wondering. Alina stayed on the phone with David for a long time. Neither of them seemed to know how to end the conversation. There were too many years between them. Too many things that had never been said. Finally, David asked, Mom, can I come see you? Alina closed her eyes. For years, she had imagined hearing those words. Now that she finally had, she didn't know what to say. Yes, she whispered. Whenever you're ready. I am. Alina looked toward the photograph on the mantle. Then come home. David was quiet. I will. After the call ended, Alina remained in her chair. The phone was still in her hand. She looked at the screen. The call had lasted 53 minutes. 53 minutes after years of silence. She had once believed that hearing David's voice again would make everything feel right. It didn't. The missed birthdays were still missed. The empty holidays were still empty. The years she had spent wondering were still gone. A phone call could not return them, but it could give her something else. An answer. For years, Alina had asked herself the same questions. Did he still love me? Did he remember me? Had I done something wrong? Why didn't he call? Now she knew. David had been struggling. He had been ashamed. He had been afraid. He had stayed away because he didn't know how to come back. That didn't excuse everything. Alina understood that. Understanding was different from excusing. She could be hurt by what he had done and still love him. Both things could be true. The next morning, Alina woke early. She walked downstairs and made coffee. 1 cup. She sat beside the window. For the first time in years, she didn't put the phone beside her chair and wait for 7 o'clock. She simply left it on the kitchen counter. If David called, she would answer. If he didn't, she would still have her day. She opened the curtains. Sunlight filled the kitchen. She looked around the house. It was still quiet, but the quiet felt different. It no longer felt like a punishment. It was simply a house waiting for morning. 3 days later, David arrived. Alina heard the knock on the door. Her heart began racing. She stood in the hallway. For a moment, she was afraid to open it. Then she did. David stood on the porch. He looked older than she remembered. Gray touched his hair. There were lines around his eyes. He looked tired, but when he smiled, Alina saw the boy who used to run through her kitchen. "Hi's Mom." Alina's eyes filled with tears. "Hi's sweetheart." They hugged. She held him for a long time. Neither of them said anything. They didn't nod too. Later, they sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Elena had spent years waiting. David looked around. "You still have this chair." She smiled. "You always sat there." He looked at the chair. "I remember." They talked for hours. Not about everything. Not yet. Some wounds needed time. David told her about his life. Elena told him about hers. She told him about Ruth's. The garden. The little girl who liked her flowers. The book club she had finally joined. David smiled. "You've been busy." Elena looked at him. "You told me to have a life." He laughed softly. "I did. And I finally listened." That afternoon, David helped her in the garden. For years, Elena had imagined what it would feel like to have her son beside her again. She had imagined a perfect reunion. There was nothing perfect about this one. They struggled with the old fence. They disagreed about where to put a plant. David spilled soil across the walkway. Elena complained, "You always make a mess." He smiled. "You always complain." She laughed. For a moment, it felt like an ordinary afternoon. And that was enough. They were not pretending the years hadn't happened. They were not pretending that one visit could repair everything. They were simply sitting in the same garden again. Mother and son. Ordinary. Familiar. Together. When David left that evening, he stood at the door. "I'll call you tomorrow." Elena looked at him. This time, she didn't answer with a promise. She simply smiled. "Okay." After he left, she closed the door. Then she walked into the kitchen. The phone was on the counter. She looked at it. For years, she had believed the phone was the thing keeping hope alive. Now she understood that hope had never really belonged to the phone. It belonged to her, and she could choose what kind of hope she wanted. She didn't need to sit beside the phone anymore. She didn't need to watch the clock. She didn't need to wonder whether her son remembered her. She knew he had finally come home. Not to erase the years. Not to pretend nothing had happened. But to begin again. Elena made herself a cup of tea. Then she sat in her chair. The phone remained on the counter. She didn't move it beside her. She didn't turn the volume up. She simply let it be. For the first time in years, Elena wasn't waiting. She was living. The next morning, David called. Elena answered. "Hi's Mom." She smiled. "Hi, sweetheart." And that was enough. Not because the past had disappeared. Not because the hurt had vanished. But because she no longer needed every call to prove that she was loved. She had finally heard the truth she had been waiting years to hear. David had never stopped loving her. He had simply been too ashamed and afraid to come home. Elena could forgive him slowly. She could still be hurt. She could love him without pretending those years hadn't mattered. And she could live without keeping her whole heart beside the phone. That evening, she placed the phone on the kitchen counter. Not beside her chair. Not in her hand. Just there. If it rang, she would answer. If it didn't, she would still have tomorrow. Elena looked toward the photograph of David as a little boy. That boy loved me, she whispered. Then she smiled. She knew the man he had become loved her too. It had taken him years to find his way back. It had taken her years to stop waiting. But now, at last, neither of them was standing at the door alone. Elena turned off the kitchen lights. She walked past the phone. She didn't need to wait anymore.